I haven't run out of steam yet, so in this installment I'm going to give a brief overview of the Bushido Blade series, two unorthodox weapon-based fighters that take full advantage of their 3D settings. Developed by Lightweight and published by Squaresoft, Bushido Blade was released in 1997 and its sequel was produced about a year later. Although they share the same engine and mechanics, they're somewhat different in terms of pacing, controls, and storyline, and very different from most fighting games that exist today. Bushido Blade's main selling point is that proper pacing and swordplay can win a match, rather than lengthy combo strings or gimmicks. This is due to the game's body damage system, which allows players to disable their opponents by striking a limb, or even outright kill their opponent with one well-timed blow, or just a few good strikes. That feature alone would be a good reason to play this game. I mean, think about most of the fighting games that you've seen or played in your life. In those games, the action is linked to an arbitrary life bar rather than any established rules of basic human anatomy. A character could get powerbombed from 10 feet in the air, break a limb, or have their spine twisted like a pretzel, and still get up as if they had just been brushed with a slow breeze or zephyr. To be fair, the concept isn't unprecedented, but most of the time it only appears in mech-based fighters, and the worst that happens in those games is that the effective player uses the use of a weapon for a few moments. Nothing too drastic. And even the ones that do feature some sort of damage system for limbs, torsos, and other body parts only go as far as to jack up the damage caused on repeated attacks to damage body parts. It's too bad that more fighters don't feature this sort of thing, but then again, it would be a colossal pain to balance it out, and I can't even begin to imagine the sort of chaos that would come from trying to implement this sort of feature in a sprite-based fighter. But I'm going off on a tangent here, and I'm also selling the game short, because the series offers a lot more than just flayed extremities. The main differences between each character lies within the selection of weapons that are available for selection. There's quite a selection, from relatively light blades to heavy, lengthy spears, swords, and bludgeoning weapons, and lots of options in between the two extremes. The odd thing is that most characters have varying degrees of mastery with each weapon, and usually have one main weapon that they've completely mastered, so the option to choose your weapon isn't as impressive as it may seem at first. However, the obvious advantages and disadvantages of weapon length and weight are still present, and the weight and length affect the recovery of attacks and blocking. In addition to the main weapon, most characters have a secondary weapon that can be thrown for a one-shot projectile attack. It's at this point that the first and second games differ in a few ways. For starters, the controls are drastically changed from the first game to the second. In the first game, there are 3 attack buttons: triangle for high attacks, circle for medium attacks, and X for low attacks. And blocking is performed by pressing square, or just using the length of the weapon to absorb any blows. In addition, attacks can be parried by pressing the square button at the correct time. Proper defense is denoted by colored flashes. Blue flashes indicate clean parries, green flashes are bad parries or bad blocks which have a bit of recovery, white flashes indicate solid blocks which can be followed up by quick attacks, and orange flashes occur on counter hits. The North American release added blood with each successful strike to the body, which is a nice touch. It's usually the reverse when it's brought over to the US, so that's something of note. Aside from these controls, attacks are based on position and movement. For example, while standing, a character can run, sidestep, jump attack, toss a weapon, toss dirt, and much more. While running, said character can attack high, mid, or on an axis, but not much else. If they fall to their knees, which hopefully won't happen unless their leg is injured, they can throw something, or give up. In addition, each character has 3 stances: high, mid, and low, which allows them to use different strikes, guards, and combos. This is important because all of the combos in both games are canned. It's not necessarily the most exciting thing, I know, but considering that even a stray hit can maim, it's a necessary evil. Besides, it's not too removed from how most schools teach weapon-based combat. In the second game, the stances and sub-weapons were carried over, but the manner of attacking and blocking was changed. For starters, some characters can now dual-wield certain weapons, and feature specialized abilities that can be used when wielding their weapon of choice. Also, there are only two types of attack, horizontal and vertical, which are mapped to X and circle respectively. Horizontal attacks are used to block vertical attacks and vice versa. With a bit of practice, you can judge what type of attack is launched by reading the wind-up of your opponent. It's also possible to block like attacks, but there's a chance that your character may stumble if you do, and mistiming your block will just end up with you eating steel. Changing stances is performed by pressing square, but instead of picking stances on the fly with respective buttons, they have to be cycled through. Also, for some reason, the developers have made the legs invincible. That is, no matter how they're hit, they won't break or become injured, they just add to the overall damage. Also, falling from tall ledges or cliffs is fatal. The controls are definitely at the forefront of the game, and to be honest, the character designs and storylines are almost as straightforward as the gameplay, but the series does have an actual plot in there, and it's a pretty decent one. It's not exactly a tale of souls and swords eternally retold, but it's a solid one and it doesn't fall apart in the sequel too much. One interesting feature of note in the first game is its story mode. In story mode, the goal is to make it out of the castle in one piece while being chased by every other member of your dojo. How you make it out of the castle affects the ending that you receive. If you fight dirty or just run out, you'll get the standard ending. But if you meet a series of impossibly strict criteria that match the code of Bushido, including such brilliant maneuvers as letting the enemy rattle off a speech, not hitting them while they're down, and never getting hit, you'll get the character's true ending. As for the second game, well, it's a lot more interesting and refined in my opinion, but also much more straightforward in its story. So the story isn't as much of a big draw, but it's actually tolerable to play through, and every character gets a unique story, so that's another good note. Overall, I would say that Bushido Blade 2 is the superior game. It has more characters, more moves, and smoother controls, and it makes its predecessor look empty by comparison. But some people prefer that empty, desolate feeling in their games, and they're both fairly good in their own way. I'm kinda bummed out that the series never caught on before Squaresoft and Enix did the unspeakable, and that the closest thing the world has to a sequel is that mediocre Kengo series. But it's to be expected. This is what usually happens to games. When they don't strike it out big, they usually fall by the wayside. Personally, I'm just glad that it ended on the top of its game, rather than being turned into a fanboy circle jerk. So, let's appreciate this series for what it is, and leave it at that.